What's going on, folks? HeirofCarthage here, and I am back with some more Total War Warhammer 2 battle commentary. This time it's going to be dwarves versus chaos, and this battle was fought specifically to pit the dwarves against chariots, because it's pretty much one of their main nemeses. And the dwarf player here, which, you know, I'll let you all see their names at the end, the dwarf player is going to go with gyrocopters with brimstone guns. It's a solid choice. They're not going to stop chariots from rolling around, but they can certainly do damage to them, and they have other uses. Now, the main line of the dwarves is going to be longbeards. They can't be broken with psychology, so they're a solid pick there. They have very good armor. They're not going to do a lot of killing, but they will give you some time, and they're mixed in with a couple of dwarf warriors, too, to drop the price. Then there's a couple of longbeards with great weapons and dwarf warriors with great weapons on the flank. Nice flank units. They can deal armor-piercing damage to units that could be coming through the flank. And then there's a giant slayers, and then a runesmith with all three runes: Oath and Steel, Negation, and Wrath and Ruin. And then he's also got the special ability with the hammer too that will debuff. And then we have the Slayer King, not any king here, not the High King, the Slayer King. And yeah, solid pick too, unbreakable, anti-large. Can definitely be useful in certain situations if he's not getting knocked around like a ragdoll. Now, the Chaos Warriors here are going to be led by Sigvald, which is actually not a bad pick versus the dwarves too. He's a little bit hard for the dwarves to kill because he's not a real high-profile target, and if they bring a bunch of artillery and stuff, he can be pretty useful. There's going to be some standard Chaos Warriors. These are good for their shields, and should win any fight against Longbeards and stuff over the long run. Not a bad pick to be leading a front line. There are some Chaos Warriors with great weapons as well. Looks like, I think there's two of those for sure. Yeah, it looks like two. And then there's the 4 Chaos Warriors, I believe. No, sorry, 3 Warriors with great weapons. There's a few Marauder Horsemen with axes, 2 Chaos Chariots, 1 Gore Beast Chariot. So definitely units that can help against the dwarves. Now, you saw that one shot off of these brimstone guns hit these Chaos Warriors and killed 8 of them. Brimstone guns are pretty darn effective against highly armored infantry, and definitely a viable target, especially if you get them in a blob. Plus, these things have bombs. Don't forget to use the bombs on infantry blobs. They do die to skirmishers relatively quick, and they're a little bit shaky in melee. But you saw there that they actually put down a pretty solid couple of hits here on these Chaos Chariots, and then killed some of those infantry too. So again, multiple uses for gyrocopters. They're the only mobility, and they do have a little bit of mass. They're capable of slowing down bigger units, at least temporarily. You're going to see the Longbeards here engage with the Chaos Warriors up front. And then, you know, the 2 leaders for the dwarves going to hold back. Very unfavorable terrain for the dwarves here, so they're going to have to try and hold out. There was 1 unit of Iron Breakers that I failed to mention earlier. This Iron Breaker, definitely going to be a target. So we're going to get a final transmutation here on Ungrim, which is actually going to hurt these Slayers because they're within that circle as well. So Slayers will take quite a bit of damage off that too. A Metal Sorcerer is always a good pick against the dwarves, especially, and a final transmutation is going to work just fine, especially on Ungrim. But it's also a great spell to drop the armor off of dwarves, and so using Plague of Rust can be a very effective way to cut through a dwarf unit faster and try and get the breakthroughs that you need, because the dwarves are going to try and outlast you. And they can do it pretty darn well, like over here where you get the warrior and the longbeard with great weapon. The 2 units combined, they're going to dish out a lot of damage, and they're going to be stubborn to rout. And even though a Chaos Warrior with great weapon is superior to either, yeah, it's just a lot for a Chaos Warrior to chew on. And then when the chariots get bogged down, they also take that armor-piercing damage. Here comes some giant slayers that should be able to pin them in. And over here, the gyrocopters are attempting to keep the chariots from fleeing so they can bring the slayers in. It's not going to be easy. It won't always work. It could occasionally work. But again, at least you get the mobility and the mass to kind of keep hounding those chariots. One of the chariot units did get through here, and let's check this out here. They're going to use the brimstone guns to good effect. These Gore Beast Chariots are pretty big targets, and they're going to suffer when they get hit by those brimstone guns. They still have a lot of hit points, though. These Iron Breakers doing a good job of being on defensive stance. So see how they're on the defensive. They can continue to hurl their blasting charges into these blobbed Chaos Infantry, and again, maximize their effectiveness. Then the main line of Longbeards is slowly and surely losing to the Chaos Warriors, but it's lasting And that's what the dwarves need right now, is they need this fight to drag on for as long as possible. And the support of the runesmith over here is great. The runes of negation and oath and steel going to be helpful. And then, of course, the chariots are the ones that are getting the debuffs here. You can use the Wrath and Ruin to help pull down the warriors with great weapons, but the speed debuff on Wrath and Ruin is also quite good to use against the chariots. But nicely done there too in that Gorby's chariot to kind of nerf it with that hammer. Nasty chariot charge inbound over here on the Dawi. See those Marauder horsemen still kind of working the background, but they are constantly kind of harassed by slayers. And then the gyrocopters kind of holding position. See the runesmith there. And the Slayer King is outrolling with his slayers. That's not a bad place for him. Gives him some protection, puts him in a good position to be potentially useful. See, he's rolling over here with some of the slayers. Still got long beards with great weapons back here, and just look at this, these iron breakers, how they're able to get in here and hold up this fight for a long time. Very tough units, lots of armor. That would be one of those units that would have been good to use, what do you call it, the Plague of Rust on them. These chariots still being constantly and consistently harassed here by the gyrocopters, and another Oath and Steel here being dropped, which will make the dwarf units a little more resistant for longer. And being outlasted by dwarves is always the struggle you're going to face with them. However, you can see the superior Chaos Warriors with great weapons were able to cut through over here. And they've done so in a pretty cost-effective manner. It's just taken a long time, and they've taken a lot of damage. This is what you want as the dwarves. You want the fight to drag on as long as possible, and then in that case, your armor and morale starts to become your friend, and your low attack isn't as much of an enemy. It's fun to play as dwarves, very different, but there are people I've seen who become quite capable with them over time, and gyrocopters are not a unit to be underused or underestimated. They are very useful units for what they do. And in fact, I think if you were going to find a way to make the dwarves a lot more competitive in multiplayer, it would be done by tweaking gyrocopters to make them better. And that's pretty much, I think, the way that you make the dwarves more viable in competitive multiplayer. They're not bad, the gyrocopters. They're not awful. But if they were better, think about it. Now the dwarves have mobility, and they have better answers to some of those things, and it makes them a much more threatening faction. So I feel like that tweaking the gyrocopters would be a huge way to make the dwarves better, and something that I'd love to see Creative Assembly do, because I do hate that the dwarves get so very little attention in any legitimate competitive multiplayer. Still a heck of a fight to go on here. Sigvald is in good shape, though he is tangled up with a whole bunch of Giant Slayers. The Giant Slayers are taking a bunch of axes to the back, which has to be pretty unpleasant. But Sigvald is also taking a bunch of axes to the back, which, again, must be pretty unpleasant. See the gyrocopters coming through, dropping their bombs. A bit of a miss there, but the other one killed some of the Chaos Warriors here. Definitely don't forget to use those bombs, as was done there. They're great against the infantry, especially if they get, a little bit demoralized and it's a long ways into a fight. So the dwarves lost certain infantry fights, and in others, they're just kind of overwhelming the chaos. So you can see here the two Chaos Warriors just bogged down again in an onslaught or slog out of a fight that's just not going to be great. Wrath and Ruin here to slow down the cavalry to help the Slayers come in, so a nice play. Being able to use that Runesmith to an advantage. You can see the cavalry really struggling to get away from the Slayers. They do catch it, eventually they'll get away, but then the gyrocopters being used to slow it down. Against lighter cavalry or chariots, I think the gyrocopters definitely could be a nice unit for slowing the retreat of enemy cavalry. But I mean, you got to watch out for monsters and heavy cavalry, as the gyrocopters won't like that one bit. But again, they do have the mass, and against those targets that I just mentioned, though, the monsters and the heavy cavalry, the gyrocopters' guns are quite effective. Quite effective. So again, don't want to underestimate the capability of those. They're probably an underused unit overall, at least in my opinion. They do get used, but I think gyrocopters are, at least by me, underused. I don't know, maybe the rest of you use them quite well. Sigvald has eventually cut his way through all these Slayers, but a Giant Slayer is not a good unit for Sigvald to be tied up with. They are going to do a lot of armor-piercing damage. He can't rout them. They're just going to cause a lot of problems. This Metal Sorcerer has caused a significant amount of damage with his charges, helping to support the Chaos troops. And it is going to be a pretty tight fight through here. Sigvald just not giving up on these Slayers. He really wanted a piece of them, but then he gets more Slayers for his trouble. Slayers are definitely a unit that will kind of just wear down Sigvald over time. Not going to be an ideal place for him, though he does have high damage. Very high damage. It's not a ton of armor-piercing damage, so I mean, with Slayers not having any armor, they're going to be dishing a lot of damage to Sigvald because they won't rout, but he's also in turn going to be dishing a heck of a lot of damage to them. You can see him with 85 kills. And that Metal Sorcerer doing a good job of chopping up some of the gyrocopters, but they're also doing a decent job of kind of holding him down. I almost kind of think that they need to bring these Slayers in over here on the Metal Sorcerer. He would have been a great target while those gyrocopters held him still. But it didn't happen. And now we get left with just a couple of blobs here. Ungrim has come in to duel it out with Sigvald, but then he suddenly gets double-teamed by the Metal Sorcerer, and Ungrim does have pretty solid armor, but Sigvald's a good duelist. He's got high melee defense. He's not super easy to hit. And the Metal Sorcerer would be pretty easy to get rid of here with Ungrim, but I mean, he's going to be continually getting slapped by Sigvald, who has a lot of melee attack. And again, that kind of sucks as another lord, even though you have the armor. Sigvald's going to dish some damage. He's going to be a capable duelist for those reasons. High melee defense, high melee attack, shielded and armored. Ungrim's going to get plowed here by some cavalry, knocked around, definitely a downside for him. The charges of that Metal Sorcerer are going to be brutal. But the infantry fight over here is wrapping up in favor of the dwarves, which will just leave Sigvald and his Metal Sorcerer, and they are causing terrible damage to Ungrim right now, being able to take advantage of the fact that Ungrim really can't just stand and fight without getting knocked around. And it's going to hurt Ungrim bad because of that. This is something that the dwarf lords suffer mightily too. And as capable as Ungrim is, definitely is still a downside for him. He's got both these units dealing damage to him, and he's feeling it. He needs support, and here comes some of his infantry. Again, you can see some of these Chaos infantry push back. The Runesmith's coming back. Ungrim is in desperate shape here. He's down to 500 hit points, and Sigvald puts a huge hit on him, knocks him all the way down to 159. But then Sigvald gets mobbed, and he's in trouble now. But that Metal Sorcerer is coming in hoping for a knockout blow. Sigvald does get routed. Could potentially be chased by Slayers. They would be able to keep up with them. But Sigvald's not going to be chased at the moment. Looks like the Metal Sorcerer becomes the target, and they want to take him out. And he darn near routes, but just gets out of there. The hammer really debuffs Sigvald there at a very opportune moment. That hammer, a nice ability on the Runesmith. Runesmiths are just a very, very helpful unit. So Sigvald manages to come back, and the Metal Sorcerer is going to run to join him. And they're going to hope to combine their arms here. I'm going to fast forward for a minute because there is a lot of cat and mouse that's going to go on as the Chaos player attempts to try and snatch a victory from the jaws of defeat here. And some noble efforts to get to Ungrim. Very, very close. But Sigvald then gets left on his own here against these warriors with great weapons and longbeards. And again, he's not going to want to get bogged down in that fight. It's not going to be great for him. He's going to use Foe Seeker to try and stay ahead of him. But it won't work. He's going to get engaged. Meanwhile, the Metal Sorcerer gets chased. And Sigvald now engaged, starting to lose some of the few hit points that he has left. He's going to get swamped by Longbeards and Iron Breakers. And this is going to put Sigvald in a pretty tremendous hurt. That Metal Sorcerer, though, has got to want a piece of either this Runesmith or Ungrim. He's going to put a quick charge over here to help his Lord, Sigvald. He's in pretty big trouble. The Gyrocopters are back, and they dive in to hold that Metal Sorcerer. This is going to allow the rest of the dwarves to catch up. And then the Resolve of Chaos breaks. And this is one of the things. You don't want to end up in a late game with these Stunties. Their leadership is rock solid. Their attack sucks, but their leadership and their armor is definitely solid. So it's in the replay. Thanks to Reptile King and Regina for sending this in. These are two folks very active on my Discord, very active in the channel. Appreciate them both, and appreciate them putting together this battle. You know, I had to fight Regina with the chariots not too long ago. The chariots are definitely an effective weapon against the dwarves. And it would be interesting to see how players deal with that, so that was why they set up this battle. Obviously, you know, there's other things that Chaos can bring against the dwarves that are effective. This isn't the only build, but it's not uncommon to see those chariots used. And this was fun to see how Regina tried to deal with it. She didn't deal with it perfectly, but she did a pretty good job overall. And again, I think it's important for people to note, and I'll tell you the most interesting thing here is seeing Regina play as dwarves. I figured that would be against everything that she stands for instead of just playing as Avalorn all the time, but she really did something different and special for us here by playing as dwarves, so hope you all enjoyed it. Anyway, thanks to both players, and yeah, fun matchup actually between Chaos and dwarves. Chaos has a lot of tools that are pretty frightening to deal with, and you know, you can have Kolek and other things smashing through you. Dwarves definitely have the capability to shut down those large units, especially in campaign, but it's a heck of a lot harder to do in multiplayer. Definitely a lot harder to do, so hopefully makes you get an appreciation for it. Anyway, thanks to both players again for a fun battle, a very close one, and entertaining. Do appreciate it. I hope to see you all soon in some more videos, so make sure that if you liked it, you go hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell, so you'll know when the next videos are up. HeirofCarthage, signing out for now.